You are in for a great treat today, I'm telling you. It's going to be a great day here as we continue our series, Family Portraits. And I want you to know, I want to go back and say one thing about the announcements that Nolan gave about the Bridge House and about the fundraiser. What an incredible thing, just in the sovereignty of God. Somebody reaches out to us that we don't even know from Nebraska. Yeah, and saw everything on social media and said everything that is raised, I'll match it up to 100,000. Now, I'm going to that fundraiser on Tuesday. Now, I'm not wearing a costume. You might say, are you beyond that? Absolutely, I am, yes. I'm not wearing a costume, but I am going. I want to invite you to come be a part of it. I'm telling you, they need us. We need to step in that space, so I want to invite you to be a part. Many of you have heard, as I have had the opportunity to be a part of a ministry called Behind the Walls. It's Bill Glass Prison Ministry, and you go to prisons and you share your faith with prison mates there, and it's the most incredible thing. And I'll continue to go this year. Our church sponsors that ministry. But men, I need you, not only men, but I need women to go as well. And so I was at this prison, and you got to understand that they always have a person that's an introductory speaker, comedian, musician, something. And it is nothing more than to hook the prisoners. And when they start, you have to understand, you have to be real good as a communicator to hook those people in prison so they'll come. Because at the very end, that person says, they kind of share the transformation they've had in their life and said, hey, I brought some friends with me, and they want to share with you. And so one day I was at this prison, and somebody said, we want to let you know that there's a lady here, and she is one of our keynote speakers. Her name is Rhonda, Madge, and you need to hear her story. So after that day, I went over and I introduced myself to Rhonda, and I just said, tell me your story. And it was so riveting, just about the hope and about everything that she had been through. And so I told her, I said, hey, probably in November, we're going to do a family series. Was that like in July? Is that when it was, Rhonda? And I said, would you come and let me do an interview and share your story? She said, oh, I'd love to. So would you give a great bridge welcome to Rhonda Madge as she comes today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, we're so glad that you're here. And so, hey, we're just going to kind of just jump right in and kind of just tell us about your upbringing, about what's going on. But before you do, can you just share real quickly with men and women why they need to be a part of the Behind the Walls Prison Ministry?
Oh my gosh, because you can just go and it's a harvest. It's men and women that so desperately need Jesus. And it's when you first go in, they're all kind of gruff standing there. But then all of a sudden they start to hear the stories and you see them relax. And it's an opportunity, one that you need to experience, because it's funny how you go on a missions trip. You always think you're going to serve, but you're the one blessed in return, and that's what happens there.
So as we start, there is something that you say that kind of made all those ladies really relax and laugh. Okay, share that, and then just walk into your story with us, if you would.
Well, when I was first asked to speak, I had gone and served and heard some of the other speakers, and Pastor Rick White asked me to do that. And I said, but I don't have a hook. I can't sing. I'm not a comedian, all those things. Just like the enemy would have you doubt. And so I knew that I had to do something when I first got up there. So I just kind of went into this thing. Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm from Bumpus Mills, Tennessee. Bet you never heard of that, have you? Population 600. Everybody there knows everybody else's business. And they just started to laugh a little bit. And, I pulled out this Southern accent as much as I could, because the first time I did it was up in Ohio. And so I pulled the Southern on them that day, let me tell you. And those women, it was a transitional period, meaning that was where they came while it was determined where they would spend years. And so you can imagine just the trauma that they had faced. And so when they came out that day, there were tears already in their eyes the moment that they came out. And it was a great day for me, and I hope I get to do it many more times.
So walk into your story with us and about your story. But let me just tell you this, okay? She wasn't able to bring her book, but we're going to put a picture of her book about her story. I would encourage you to order this and get this. So would you get, I want you to see it so you can read it. So just walk into your story with us about your upbringing and everything that happened in your life.
Well, that picture is me as a little girl with my mother. I was an only child, grew up in Bumpus Mills, Tennessee, which is Middle Tennessee, northwest of here. And hardworking parents, rose early, worked late just to make ends meet. I knew that I was loved without question. But because they worked so hard, they never went to church. But they wanted what was best for me, so every Sunday morning they would get me up and put on my little dress and shiny shoes and send me to church with my grandparents, Mama Dore and Papa Chill. And I heard about the gospel every Sunday morning. And life went that way for the majority of my life. When I was 16 years old, I accepted Jesus. I was baptized in a creek as they were singing, "I'll fly away on the banks." It was that picturesque moment. But about 6 months later, life as I knew it changed dramatically. It was April the 19th, 1976. I got up that morning, and it was an exciting day because I was state secretary of Future Homemakers of America. And we were having our first state meeting that day, and I was going to travel to the meeting with my home economics teacher after school. We went to the meeting, and I have to tell you, I did not realize it in the moment. I only see this in hindsight. When I went to the board, because I was secretary, something came over me that day. I couldn't even write the most simple words on the board. It was just very strange. There was a girl from another school on the front row. She leaned over and whispered to somebody else, "What, is she stupid or what?" Well, that didn't help matters any. I made it out of there that day, but I was so embarrassed, and I traveled home because I felt like that I had let Miss Brigham down. I got in my car to drive the rest of the way home, and as I turned a curve to see our little white 2-bedroom farmhouse, there were people everywhere. There were cars everywhere. I knew something was wrong. I didn't even park. I went to the front of the house, and my uncle and a young man that I had been dating was walking toward me, and they were crying. I got out of the car, and I said, "Oh, my goodness, it's my mama." They said, "No, honey, no." I said, "Then it's my grandfather." And they shook their head again. And I wasn't going to ask if it was my daddy because, you see, my daddy was big old boy Taylor. He had shoulders the size of Texas and a laugh that could be heard for miles. He was just 40 years old. I knew that nothing could happen to my daddy. But then that's when they said, "It's your daddy, honey." And I fell down on my knees in the middle of the road that day. And somehow they got me inside the house, and my mom was in the house, and she was being comforted by some of the women that were our neighbors. And I looked at Mother, and I said, "Did he have a car wreck?" And she said, "No, honey, your father's been shot. Your dad was murdered today." And the room started spinning around me, and I walked to the back porch, and I looked up to the heavens, and I screamed, "Why, God, why?" The God that I had accepted and confirmed through baptism, I blamed that day. I wanted nothing to do with him. if he was going to take my daddy from me. And I walked far, far away from him. But I will tell you that in those days, there were no counseling. This is in 1976. You didn't go to counselors. You just pulled up your bootstraps. And ironically, I was supposed to be in a beauty pageant on the following Saturday night. My father had 8 brothers and sisters, and they all said, honey, if you'll go ahead and do that, we'll stay and support you. So I want you to understand that my father died on Monday. We buried him on Thursday, and I walked out on a stage on Saturday as though nothing had happened. I started looking for something to fill the void. There was a great deal of anger on the inside. Bitterness. But to the outside world, Rhonda was okay. I decided that surely a man would fix my problems. Has any woman here ever thought that? So right after high school, I got married. It didn't take me very long to realize that I'd made a grave mistake. About a year later, I left that sweet husband of mine. He didn't know what hit him. I started to college. Again, just looking for anything to fill the void and the heartache that I was experiencing in my life.
So when we began to talk, you said there was a moment to where when you were so comfortable in prisons. Can you share with us why that happened in you? And then also, you made a comment about, well, it's when I really understood about the word pretending and what that looked like. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So after I left husband number one and I started to college, I joined a sorority. All my childhood friends were in a sorority, and it was made a way for me to join even though I was divorced, which is kind of a miracle in itself that just normally doesn't happen. But as I entered into that sorority, I realized very quickly that these young women, they were experiencing life and fun and joy. And here I had already been a wife, and the wifely duties and what that looked like, and had worked, and on top of all of the trauma and pain and heartache that I experienced. But I realized, Pastor Phil, that when I became a world-class pretender was at that beauty pageant. Because I realized that I could walk out on a stage and my exterior did not reveal anything about what was going on in my heart. I learned to masquerade. I became a world-class pretender, and that carried on throughout those college years. I became a party girl. Rhonda liked to have a good time. I could just go out there and be with most anyone, and they never knew that I would lay down at night and cry myself to sleep. After I graduated from college, I worked in a pharmacy while I was in college, and as the Lord would have it in his blessings, I didn't know it was the Lord at the time, because remember, I kept him out here. But I can only see all of this in hindsight, which is the reason that my book is called Hindsight. I landed a great job in the pharmaceutical industry, moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. I thought surely moving there, crossing state lines, would give me a fresh start that I needed, and nobody would know about that Rhonda that I was leaving behind. And when I got there, Phil, it wasn't long after that I got a phone call from my mother. the man who had murdered my father, who received life in prison, 99 years and a day. He was not supposed to get out. He developed cancer and heart disease. He had only been in for 6 years, but he was costing the state a lot of money. So he was coming up for parole. And my mama said, honey, we got to go before the parole board to try to keep him in. So I traveled back to Stewart County, and we came to Nashville. That was my first day to walk through prison doors. We were in front of a parole board, 2 women and 2 men. And all of a sudden, James Mathis, or he's known as Amos Ingle in the book because you got to protect the names of the innocent. He walked out of a side door. He had on a pair of starched jeans and a shirt. He had a number on his pocket, but otherwise you wouldn't know that he was a prisoner. He looked really healthy to me. And he came and he sat right down to my right. And I looked at this man, and I had so much hatred in my heart in that moment for him. And at one point in time, he actually looked at me and said, will you allow me to spend my last dying days with my mother? I spewed on that man. I said, why didn't you think about that before you took my father from me? I hated him with all of my heart. I hated him. But that's what unforgiveness does. He was released soon after. So along came husband number 2. I was still really messed up. What I couldn't see at the time is that I married a man that was secretly in love and had been having an affair with another woman who was married for a long time. So I walked right into his mess. We were married for about a year, and he left me for her. All the while, that just added to my heartache and anger. How could a good God allow such bad things to happen? Then here came husband number 3. Will somebody say, God bless her heart? I'm going to tell you the end of that. He's going to be here at the 3rd service. So praise the Lord that the Lord sent me someone that we could hang in there together. And I will tell you that he was as messed up as me when we got married. But I was 35 years old at that time, and I wanted children desperately. And we had our first daughter, and I'm going to tell you that when I looked into her eyes, I knew that there had to be a God. There had to be a God to have given me such a gift. 17 months later, we had a little boy. And something started to stir in us that we wanted them in church. Now, God works in mysterious ways, as we all know. He could use those 2 children to get my husband and I in there as well. That started a journey, Pastor Phil. It was a slow process. I'm not going to tell you that the Holy Spirit hit me and it was a miraculous thing that happened. I wish that it happened that way, but it was a slow process. We started this journey to church, and we would go every Sunday. And I'll never forget the day that the pastor walked out on the stage. It's Pastor Rick White in Franklin who invited me to the behind the walls. So it's a big part of my life. But he walked out on that stage that day, and he started preaching about the woman at the well. Somebody that had 5 husbands, more husbands than me. I couldn't believe it. It was the very first time that God's word became alive. And I knew that it was for me. And all of a sudden, I began to put myself in Scripture. And then my husband walked out into a lobby, and there was all these trips to go on missions, international missions trips. And he's very gifted building, and he came to me, and he said, Rhonda, I think that might be how the Lord could use me. And so he went on his first missions trip to build and repair homes. And he started going on 3 and 4 trips a year. I said I didn't think it was for me. I had this, pharmaceutical career, and honey, you can go, and the Lord's blessed us financially. And, we were starting to really build our faith at this time. I felt good. I was learning to trust the Lord, and I had begged him over and over and over to forgive me for all that I had done. Because I had walked in dark places that I was not proud of. And then it was one day I heard a female evangelist. She said, if you were praying every time that you get on your knees that the Lord will forgive you for the same sins over and over and over again, you're not believing him for what he said he would do. That's right. That he will forgive you. And so that just started to change me. But yet, I want you to hear, this church that we were in and becoming very involved in, they did not know about Rhonda's previous life. They did not know I'd had 2 failed marriages. I just could not understand how truly a church could accept me if they knew the truth. But then the Lord began to change all of that as well, as only he can do. And then my husband went to the Ukraine on a trip, and he went to an orphanage. And he came home. Our children were then 7 and 8. I was 45 years old at the time, almost 45. And he looked at me and he said, Rhonda, I believe the Lord's calling us to adopt. And like any good Christian woman, I said, have you lost your mind? I just could not even fathom. We had a healthy boy and girl. Why would we want to adopt? And he looked at me and he said, will you pray about it? Will you just pray about it? And all of a sudden, the Lord, only as he can do, started open door after door after door to reveal indeed that we were to adopt. And so in 2004, we went to the Ukraine to adopt 2 children.
And that's really where you really begin to learn about how the attack on the family, right, Rhonda, and how, boy, the enemy how he attacks us, and also, but how you've learned how to freedom through all that. So share with us about your son and what happened there.
Yes, Pastor Phil. When we brought those 2 children home, you have to understand that they were 6 and 7, brother and sister. They had been abandoned by their mother when they were found. They were 2 and 3. They believed that they had been without food and water for 4 to 5 days when neighbors found them, and they'd been placed in an orphanage. So here are 2 children that lived a very dark existence, had been abandoned, rejection. They knew what hunger was. They also learned to lie for survival. So I just kind of want to paint that little picture for you of what happened when we brought them in our home. As I look back on it in hindsight, truly, it ticked the enemy off, because we had taken 2 children from a very dark world and brought them into our home. John 10:10 says, the enemy comes to kill, to steal, and destroy. I came, God, so that you could have life and have it abundantly. There's a battle in that verse. Picture the battle, good versus evil, spirit versus flesh, in that verse. And indeed, the enemy did come in to kill, steal, and destroy. We entered into a time when our family unit, every facet of it, came under attack. But this is the thing I want you to know. I didn't know what was happening. My husband didn't know. It was after a lot started happening that on 3 occasions, pastors came to our front door and said to us, I believe you are under a spiritual attack. You're experiencing spiritual warfare. And we said, what does that even mean? Yes, we had heard about that in the Bible, but us? We're experiencing a spiritual attack? What does that mean? And so I can tell you that we became very, very hungry to understand. I began reading books after books. I would go to conferences to hear speakers to speak on the subject because I wanted to know. And then once I understood, it was the only thing that makes sense. Because I knew with all certainty that God had called us to adopt. But you see, I wanted so desperately to be that person, to walk back onto the porch and say, why, God, why? Just like I'd done when my dad died. But yet I was in a different place because I trusted him. But it's okay to ask God why. But he was teaching me to trust him when I didn't understand. And so it was this transition that he used these 2 children from the Ukraine to start to just really change my husband and I's life. We had faith, but let me tell you, our foundation started to grow because I realized that yes, since the beginning of time, there has been a battle. But God was inviting us in to battle with him. He tells us all the time, I am with you, fear no evil. But yet, he wants us to join him and battle with him on this journey. So he taught me how to pray. But in that prayer on my knees, and my knees were calloused because, I'll just back up here. Our son that we brought home from the Ukraine, he had an attachment disorder. He never learned to bond or attach himself to another human being. So when we brought him in our home, the one thing that we were trying to give him was love, and everything in his power, he pushed us away. The unspeakable started to happen. There was so much anger in our home. All the kids were locking themselves in the room. My husband and I think the attack came against our marriage on how we were handling situations. Our finances were being attacked on what to do. And we ended up taking him to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. And we were told that he was going to have to be placed in foster care, that he would have to be removed from our family for our safety and his safety. And we said, no. We knew with all certainty that God would not have us go there and adopt and then remove that child from our home. So we learned to fight. We learned to battle. We stepped into the battle with him. But I will tell you that this lasted for about 5 to 7 years. And in that 5 to 7 years, all of that was going on. I developed breast cancer. Our oldest son got a dual concussion playing football in high school. He had to be homebound for a year. He was diagnosed with what's called a new daily persistent headache, which means it's a headache that doesn't go away. Our lives were under attack, but yet God was teaching us to trust him, even when we didn't understand. And the first truly area of business that he took me to was to forgive the man who had killed my father. And I will tell you that as I started that process, I began to realize what a good and gracious God He truly was. And I believe that with all my heart, James Mathis accepted Christ while he was in prison. Because that day he looked at me and said, "Will you allow me to spend my last dying days with my mother?" He got to do that. He was with her for 6 weeks before he died. The Lord put me in the car to travel to the cemetery where I knew this man was buried. It was a fall day, much like today. I was walking, I was alone, and the leaves were blowing, and I was in search of his grave, and all of a sudden, before me is a monument. He was buried with his mother, and inscribed on the tombstone, "We suffered on earth together, but now we walk in heaven together." All of that anger went away, because how could I hate someone to condemn them to hell?
As we conclude for this morning, people here that are struggling with spouse issues, kid issues, jobs, sin that has led to an addiction or getting there close to do that, Rhonda, give us a few truths as we close shop, as we land the plane here. Give us a few truths that we can encourage people with.
I would just tell you, first and foremost, is to know that the spiritual battle is real, is to believe that it's real. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." The second thing I would tell you is to pray with all your heart. Pray continually. If you don't know how to pray, use Jesus' words. The Lord's Prayer. Use David's prayer in Psalm 23. But the prayer that I pray every day is James 4:7. Literally every day. "I surrender unto you this day, my Lord God, and I resist the enemy. And your word says he will flee from me. And on behalf of my man and my 4 children, I say, on their behalf, I surrender them unto you this day, and I resist the enemy over their life, and he will flee from them." I don't miss a day. Third is to learn to stand firm. Ephesians 6 is a description of the battle, and it's a description of what the Lord wants us to do into stepping in this battle to fight with him. He says, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Resist him. 1 Peter 5:9. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brothers who are in the world. Do you know anybody today that's not facing something? And finally, we have to trust. Above all else, that's what the Lord has taught me. He will whisper, "Rhonda, do you trust me?" "Yes, Lord, I trust you." 1 Peter 5:10 has become my life verse. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you.
give Rhonda a great round of applause for joining us today. God bless you. Thank you, ma'am. You know, we sing that song, You Never Lost a Battle. And I think we think, okay, I can believe that God is this incredible God, this so great God, and so majestic and so powerful. He's never lost a battle. But this is what we forget. We forget that he's never lost a battle, but when he does that, that's for us. And some of you today, you've got issues with spouses, you've got issues with kids, you've got issues with your job, with finances, with your own addiction, with your own sin, and you're thinking, there's no way that I can get beyond that. And yet the thing that we forget is this, is that we all have these shelves that we put these gods on, and everything on these shelves is that we live for these things. And you see, this is what happened, is that when Jesus died and was resurrected, he took all the corruptible things off the shelf. Because, see, we live for all those things on the shelf. We live for all these gods, and with these gods, it brings guilt, and it brings shame, and it brings death. And there's some of you here today, they're going, you know what, I hear Rhonda's story, and I hear her husband's story, but I don't know, I'm not really sure. I don't think that God can forgive me. With one act, with one supernatural act of the resurrection, he took all of the corruptible and he replaced it with the incorruptible. So that you and I can not only have a relationship, so that we can walk in victory. And yes, when things are not going your way and man, your family is under attack, and let me tell you, that's what the enemy's going to do, is that he's going to attack your family foremost. He knows that's where your most prized possession is. That's what he's coming after. And so he says, stand firm, because, so number one, you trust him with salvation. But secondly, you trust him every day of your life, and you don't stop trusting him. Oh, my goodness, I sat there and listened to Rhonda, and I thought, I don't know about anybody else, but oh, goodness, Phil, you need to hear this story today. Trust me. So what is it today of where you need to trust Jesus? In your family. Be specific with your marriage. And I'm not going to look at you and say that your spouse is going to come back. I don't know that he will come back or that she will come back. I don't know if they will ever really own their sin, because some of you right now, you're still trying to blame them. Own your own stuff first. We talked about that last week. Own your stuff, but then give them to the Lord. Trust him and know that he has never lost a battle. And he stands with you in the midst of your battle, and he does not leave you. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Let me just ask, do you know Christ? Have you trusted him for that? That's the first step. Have you given your life to him? If you have not, make that your first step today, that you say yes to Jesus. You give him your life today. And if you want to make that decision right now, I'm going to invite you to make this decision, that you would say yes to Jesus, that you take your hands off your life and you give everything to Jesus. You place your faith and trust in him. Oh, friend, would you do that this morning? Whether you're here, whether you're watching online, would you give your life to Jesus today? In doing that, I would ask that you would pray this prayer along with me as I pray it out loud. You pray it silently. Dear Jesus, I understand that you took my sins for me, and you are enough. And I give you my life today. I hold nothing back. No one looking around, but if you just prayed that prayer right then, in this moment, I want you to do me a favor right now. I want you right now to have enough courage to lift your hand and say, I just prayed that prayer right now. Lift it up right now. Unashamedly, just lift it up right now. Would you do that? Thank you. Where is it you need to trust Jesus today, with your family, with your kids, with your business, with your finances? Oh, yes, the enemy attacks. Greater is he who is in me than he that is in the world. Jesus is with you. He is enough.